When Jackson first suggested the idea of renting a yacht for the weekend, I thought he was joking. None of us were particularly wealthy, or even yacht people for that matter. But Jackson always had a way of making ridiculous plans into real experiences. It was supposed to be a break from the monotony of our 9-to-5 lives, a chance to reconnect as friends and leave everything behind for a few days. None of us could have predicted what that trip would turn into. If we had known, maybe, just maybe, we would have thought twice before stepping aboard. We set off late that Friday afternoon under a cloudless blue sky. It was the kind of day that made the ocean look like a giant sheet of glass, perfectly calm and reflective. The 8 of us were buzzing with excitement as we boarded the sleek white yacht, which Jackson had somehow managed to secure at a friend of a friend discount. "Can you believe this?" Sarah exclaimed as she stepped onto the deck. Her red hair caught the sunlight as she threw her arms out dramatically. "We're out here living the dream. Don't get used to it," I chuckled, tossing my duffel bag onto one of the cushioned benches. "Normal life resumes on Monday." "Speak for yourself," Jackson shouted from the helm, where he'd already positioned himself like some sort of captain from an action movie. "For all you know, I might just decide to live out here permanently." "Right?" Emily quipped as she fiddled with the speaker system to get music playing. "Let's see you survive off instant noodles and bottled water on a boat." Laughter rippled through the group as everyone settled into their spots. The yacht wasn't massive, but it was big enough to comfortably fit all of us. With its pristine white interior, a modest living area below deck, and plenty of space on the sun-soaked upper deck, Jackson piloted us away from the marina while Mark, ever the self-proclaimed grill master, started setting up drinks and snacks. "What's the goal here?" asked Dave, leaning casually against one of the railings as the marina grew smaller in the distance. "Are we just going to float around for 2 days?" Correction, float luxuriously," said Chloe, folding her sunglasses onto her face with an exaggerated flair. "It's called relaxation, Dave. Look it up." "Relaxation, my ass," laughed Mark, passing out beers. "I'm here to party." "Who brought tequila?" The first few hours were pure magic. Between the music, the laughter, and the unspoiled view of the sea stretching endlessly in all directions, it was easy to forget about everything back home. I remember standing at the bow of the boat, feeling the cool spray of the salty sea breeze on my face as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. "This is incredible," Emily murmured, joining me at the front of the boat with a can of sparkling water in hand. "I mean, how often do we just stop? You know, no emails, no deadlines, no phones constantly buzzing." "You're going to jinx it," I teased, stealing a sip from her drink. But deep down, I knew she had a point. For the first time in ages, I felt free, really free. As the day turned into evening, the mood only got livelier. Sarah pulled out a deck of cards, and we all gathered in a ragtag circle on the cushioned seating, half playing, half heckling each other as the sky above shifted from gold to pink to a rich, velvety blue. The combination of drinks, bad jokes, and even worse card strategies had us roaring with laughter. Okay, just admit it," Jackson said, pointing an accusatory finger at Chloe. "You're definitely cheating." "Excuse me," Chloe shot back, hand over her heart like she was personally offended. "I don't need to cheat to beat you. I'm just that good." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Jackson grumbled, tossing his cards onto the pile as we all broke into laughter again. As night fell, we anchored far from any visible land, the yacht now gently swaying in the open sea. The calmness was almost hypnotic. Overhead, the sky was littered with stars, a sight we rarely got to see back home in the city. Mark threw burgers on the small grill, while Sarah strung some fairy lights around the seating area to give it a cozy glow. "This doesn't feel real," Dave said as he leaned back against the railing, staring at the stars. "It's like we've left the world behind." "In a way we have," Emily replied, her voice soft as she traced patterns in the air with her finger. "No deadlines, no stress, just us, the ocean, and whatever's out there." Chloe nudged her. "Okay, way to make it sound creepy." We laughed again, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The world was perfect. Just 8 friends, a yacht, and endless possibilities ahead. If only we knew what was waiting for us out there. The party was in full swing when I first noticed it. By then, we were all spread out across the yacht, leaning into that sweet spot of the night where the conversations grew louder, the jokes got sillier, and the alcohol started to cast its comfortable haze. Jackson was behind the wheel, pretending to steer the stationary yacht like it was a pirate ship, bellowing in a terrible imitation of a captain's voice. Raise the sails. Emily and Sarah were lounging on the deck under the glow of the fairy lights, swapping stories from high school that none of us had heard in years. Mark was at the grill again, flipping burgers with the pure concentration of someone who took the job far too seriously, while Dave, of course, was already deep into his third or fourth beer. Chloe was snapping photos of everything, laughing as she got us in frame one by one. It was around this time I wandered toward the edge of the boat. I don't really know why. Maybe I needed a breather, or maybe the hypnotic sound of the waves called to me. The wind had picked up slightly, sending a cool breeze across the deck that cut through the warmth of the string lights. I propped my elbows on the railing, letting the rhythmic push and pull of the ocean steady everything. The stars above were blindingly bright. It was almost too perfect of a moment. The water below was impossibly dark, like ink spilled from the sky. It only caught the faint shimmer of moonlight when the waves crested just right. I was staring into that vast and endless darkness when it happened. At first, I wasn't sure what I had seen. It was so brief, so fleeting. But as I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes, something shifted beneath the surface. A shadow. No, not a shadow. Something bigger. Something alive. It was massive, moving far below the boat. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It had glided past too quickly to make out anything clearly. I couldn't see details, just a long, dark shape, silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the water. And the way it moved, it wasn't natural. It wasn't the slow, lazy movement of something small like a school of fish or the smooth gliding of a dolphin. No, this was deliberate, heavy. It carried the weight of something ancient. "Hey, Lisa, you good?" Mark's voice snapped me back like a rubber band. I straightened abruptly, my heart hammering in my chest. "Yeah, I started, glancing over my shoulder at him. He was holding out a plate with a burger on it, one eyebrow raised. "I'm fine." "You sure?" He stepped closer, peering out over the water. "You look like you just saw a ghost." I turned back to the water, scanning the surface. It was calm again, completely undisturbed. Surely I imagined it. Right. It had been such a long day, and maybe the alcohol paired with the low light was playing tricks on me. I tried to shrug it off. "Just spacing out," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for the food." Mark didn't look convinced, but he nodded and handed me the plate before heading back to the grill. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, staring into the blackness, trying to shake the feeling that something was out there watching us. Still, everything looked normal again, but any chance I had of convincing myself that I imagined it vanished minutes later. The yacht suddenly jolted. It wasn't violent. Nothing like what you'd expect from a collision or a wave crashing into us. It was more like a push, as if something underneath had nudged the boat with enough force to make everyone feel it, but not enough to be immediately alarming. "What the hell was that?" Chloe asked, her voice breaking through the music. She was standing near Jackson at the helm, her camera still in her hands. "Probably just a wave," Jackson replied dismissively, though he looked slightly uneasy. "Not with the water this calm," Emily said, getting to her feet. She walked over to me, visibly concerned. "Lisa, did you feel that?" "Yeah," I said, setting my burger down as I glanced nervously over the edge again. "Something's weird." The others began drifting toward the railing, their curiosity piqued. Sarah joined us, staring out into the water with sharp focus. "Maybe it was a whale," she suggested after a beat. Jackson let out a loud laugh. "A whale? Come on. We'd see its blowhole or whatever. It's nothing. Probably just some fish." "Not funny," Emily muttered, crossing her arms as she glanced warily at the water. I didn't say a word. My stomach was still twisted into knots from earlier, and now I couldn't ignore the memory of that shadow. My mind raced as I replayed what I had seen. It couldn't have been a whale, or if it wasn't one like I'd ever seen. The size, the shape, it didn't add up. And the way it moved felt too controlled, too purposeful. As if on cue, the yacht jolted again. This time, it was harder. Just enough to make Sarah lose her balance for a moment. "Okay, what the hell?" Mark said, stepping closer to the edge. That wasn't a wave. He wasn't wrong. A strange silence settled over the group, and for the first time since we'd set out, no one looked like they were having fun anymore. The atmosphere grew tense as we all stared down into the black abyss, waiting for something, anything, to happen. "Do you think we should?" Sarah began, but before she could finish, the yacht gave a final, subtle rock. No one said anything, but the uneasiness in the pit of my stomach swelled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there had just let us know we weren't alone. By now, the mood on the boat had shifted. It wasn't a sudden change, as if someone had flipped a switch. It was gradual, creeping in like a fog rolling over the water. The laughter and casual chatter that had filled the air earlier were gone, replaced by quiet murmurs and glances that lingered too long at the dark water below. It had been at least an hour since the last jolt, but none of us could shake the lingering tension. Emily tried to restart the music, hoping it would break the silence, but even that seemed out of place now. The low electronic beat that once felt vibrant now sounded hollow against the whisper of the waves. "Do you think it's safe to be out here?" Chloe asked, breaking the silence. She had her camera tucked under her arm now, no longer interested in snapping party shots. She looked at Jackson nervously, her fingers fidgeting with her hair. "It's fine," Jackson said, though for the first time all night, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "These boats are built tough. Whatever it was, probably a damn chunk of driftwood or something. It's not going to sink us." "Right." Mark chimed in from his spot by the grill. He was nursing a beer, but even he looked less casual than usual. "Stuff bumps into boats all the time. Could be a school of fish. Something like that." "That's not how fish behave," Emily replied quickly. She stood near me, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Her eyes hadn't left the horizon since the jolts began. "You all felt it. It was deliberate. It's like something—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted, holding up a hand. Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Don't even finish that sentence." Nobody responded. I could tell from their faces that everyone was thinking the same thing. She was right. We didn't want to admit it, but whatever was out there wasn't just passing by. Deep down, we all knew. It wasn't fish. It wasn't driftwood. It wasn't normal. The calm sea that had seemed so beautiful just hours ago now felt oppressively empty, and the open water that once gave us comfort now felt more like a void. The stars above were still out, twinkling innocently, as if mocking us. But the black expanse of water below, it was as dark and unknown as a nightmare. Then the engine sputtered. It was just a faint sound at first, like a choke or a cough, but it was enough to freeze all of us in place. Jackson and Dave immediately sprang into action, heading toward the helm where the controls were. I exchanged nervous glances with Emily, and she whispered under her breath, "This can't be happening." All right," Jackson muttered as he fiddled with a series of switches. "No big deal. Probably just something in the fuel line. Or maybe we drifted a little too deep." His voice trailed off as the sputtering grew louder, ending in a guttural clunk that sent a horrible silence washing over the boat. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she moved closer to him. "It means it's not working," Dave said flatly, his tone clipped in frustration. He was leaning over the controls with a scowl, pressing buttons and flipping switches, but nothing was happening. Mark, who had been silent for a while, put down his beer. "So what now? We just sit here?" "Relax," Jackson said, though his tone was far from relaxing. "It's probably just a small issue. Worst case scenario, we call for help. These things happen all the time." "Great. Call for help, then," Chloe said quickly. She was standing near the rail, her eyes darting between the group and the now eerily still water. "How far are we from the nearest coast?" Jackson hesitated. Probably an hour or two by boat." "No big deal. I'll get the radio." He disappeared below deck to look for the device. Meanwhile, The rest of us stayed frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The yacht swayed gently in the stillness of the night, and for a moment, nothing happened, and then the smell hit us. I noticed it before anyone said anything. A rancid, overwhelming stench that wafted in with the breeze. So strong it made me choke. It wasn't just the typical smell of salt or fish. It was something far worse. It was sharp, almost metallic, and so putrid that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Do you smell that?" Sarah asked, covering her nose. "Smell it? I can taste it," Mark said, grimacing as he turned his head away. "What the hell is that?" Chloe exclaimed. She looked at me, and for once, her usual sarcastic mask was gone. She was scared. I didn't want to say what I was thinking, but the smell reminded me of blood. Not just a little blood, but the kind that fills the air after an accident or some horrific injury. Heavy. Metallic. Wrong. "It's probably from the ocean," Jackson said, emerging from below deck with the radio in hand. His voice was tight, forcedly calm. "Could be some dead fish floating nearby. Happens all the time. Have you ever smelled dead fish like this before?" Emily shot back, and I could tell she was trying not to panic. But just as her voice died away, something broke the tension. "Holy shit," Chloe whispered, pointing toward the water on the starboard side. We followed her gaze, and my stomach turned to ice. Illuminated weakly by the glow of the moon, the water rippled strangely, like it was being disturbed from below. It wasn't just a wave or current. It wasn't the wind. Something large had moved just beyond the edge of the boat. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her face pale. "Tell me you saw that." I don't know what I saw," Mark admitted, stepping back from the rail. In that fleeting second, I had only caught a glimpse, a break in the surface, a faint silhouette moving deep beneath the waves. But whatever it was big, and it was getting closer. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. The night had fallen into a silence, so heavy it almost drowned out the gentle lapping of the waves against the side of the boat. We were all frozen in place, our eyes locked on the dark spot in the water where the faint ripples had just appeared. Despite the glow of the moon, it was difficult to make anything out. But we all felt it in our guts. Something was down there. What did we just see? Emily's voice was a near whisper, as if speaking too loudly would pull whatever it was closer. "I don't know," I managed to say, but it came out shakier than I intended. "It could have been a big fish, maybe." "That's not a ****ing fish," Chloe snapped, her wide-eyed stare never leaving the water. She clutched her camera as if it would somehow protect her. "Fish don't move like that." "All right, calm down," Jackson said as he put a hand on the railing, leaning forward to get a better look. His usual bravado had faded, replaced by what I could only describe as forced confidence. "Probably just a whale or something. Maybe even a shark. It happens all the time out here." "Sharks don't get that big," Sarah murmured, inching back from the edge without taking her eyes off the water. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Do they?" "I don't know how you guys are seeing anything out there," Mark added nervously, rubbing the back of his neck as he tried to find some shred of logic that could explain what we'd seen. "It's pitch black. You're all just freaking yourselves out." "Oh, bullshit, Emily hissed, spinning around to face the group. "You saw it too, didn't you? Whatever that was, it's not normal. And it's still out there." Mark fell silent, his jaw tightening. He didn't respond, which was answer enough. Then, as if on cue, it happened again. A ripple, then another closer this time. The water seemed to bulge unnaturally as something immense moved below the surface. This time, there was no mistaking it. We weren't imagining things. The ocean was far too calm for it to be just waves or some passing current. It moved with a terrifying precision and power, slow, deliberate, almost as if it knew we were watching it. "That's not a fish," Sarah stammered, gripping my arm tightly. Her nails dug into my skin, but I didn't even flinch. I was too focused on the water. And then we saw it. The moonlight hit the surface just right, illuminating the harsh gleam of pale, jagged ridges breaking through the waves for the briefest moment. A dorsal fin, massive and serrated like the edge of a saw. It rose, towering above the water for just a few seconds before sinking back beneath the surface. But those seconds were more than enough. "Oh my God," Chloe choked out, her voice trembling. "What the hell is that?" Nobody answered. We were all too stunned, too horrified to even try. I couldn't tear my eyes away from where the fin had vanished. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. My hands gripped the railing so tightly that my knuckles turned white. That thing in the water wasn't just big. It was unfathomably massive. No creature I'd ever heard of, no fish or shark or whale, could account for what we just witnessed. Did anyone else see that?" Mark asked, but his question bordered on rhetorical. The sheer panic in his voice made it obvious that he knew the answer. "What is that supposed to be?" Sarah asked, her voice teetering on the edge of hysteria. "A shark? A whale? What?" It's too big to be a shark," Emily said, her words slow and deliberate, almost like she needed to hear herself say it to believe it. "But too fast to be a whale," I added quietly. My mind raced as I tried to piece together logic that simply didn't exist. Even a whale, huge as they are, wouldn't have moved like that. Not with that kind of direction, that kind of purpose. It was as if, "It's hunting us," Chloe blurted out. "Don't say that," Jackson snapped, but even his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing on the deck. "Nobody's hunting us. This is insane. It's probably, I don't know, an old shark or something. Like, really old. Doesn't mean it's after us. Old or not, I'm not staying up here," Sarah said quickly. "I'm going below deck." She turned and hurried toward the hatch without another word, her steps quick and uneven. "Good idea," Chloe shouted after her, moving to follow. Parts of the group began to break off, desperate to reclaim even a tiny sense of safety, even if it wasn't real. But I stayed, along with Jackson, Emily, and Mark. We were fixated on the water, somehow unable to look away. And then it happened. The massive shape passed under the boat. A collective gasp escaped us as we saw the shadow, a deep, black void against the barely illuminated water. It was unmistakable. It was long, easily as long as the boat itself, if not longer, and wide enough that the light seemed to vanish entirely as it moved. The soft hum of the ocean was punctuated only by the sound of our shallow breathing. "Guys," Mark whispered, stepping back from the edge for the first time that night. That's not just a shark. What the hell is it then?" Jackson shot back, but his bravado was fading fast. His words trembled with an undercurrent of fear he could no longer hide. Emily trailed off. She didn't finish her sentence. She didn't need to. We all knew, somewhere deep down, what we were looking at, even if none of us wanted to admit it out loud. "I think it's a megalodon," I said, my voice barely audible. The word hung heavy in the air, spoken in a tone that even I couldn't believe had come from me. The kind of word you only hear in documentaries or read in ancient accounts of prehistoric predators. It was ridiculous, preposterous, impossible. And yet, "Oh God," Emily whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as the shadow disappeared, leaving us once again in a horrifying stillness. It was still out there. For a moment, none of us moved. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, as if the very weight of the word megalodon had the power to crush us. It was absurd, impossible, and yet the enormity of what we had seen left no room for doubt. The ancient predator, thought to be long extinct, was here, lurking beneath our fragile vessel. "Did you just say megalodon?" Mark's voice broke the silence, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and terror. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I know it sounds crazy, but what else could it be? It's too big to be anything else." Jackson's face was pale, his usual bravado completely shattered. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." "Well, it is," Emily snapped, her fear giving way to anger. "And standing here in denial isn't going to help us." Okay, Jackson said, taking a deep breath as if trying to regain some semblance of control. "We need to stay calm. We need a plan." "A plan?" Chloe echoed, her voice rising in pitch. "What kind of plan?" We're stuck in the middle of the ocean with a prehistoric monster circling us. First, we need to make sure everyone is safe, Jackson said, trying to sound authoritative. Let's get everyone below deck. And then what? Mark asked, his eyes wide with fear. We just wait for it to attack. We need to call for help, I said, trying to think clearly despite the panic clawing at my mind. Jackson, did you get the radio working? Jackson shook his head, frustration etched on his face. No, the radio's dead. I don't know if it's the battery or something else, but it's not working. Great, Emily muttered. Just great. Okay, let's think, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We have flares, right? We can signal for help. Flares won't do much good if there's no one around to see them, Chloe pointed out. It's better than nothing, I insisted. We have to try. Fine, Jackson said, his voice tight. Let's get the flares. And everyone else needs to get below deck. Now, we moved quickly, the urgency of the situation propelling us into action. Jackson and Mark went to retrieve the flares while Emily, Chloe, and I hurried to get Sarah and Dave. Sarah, Dave, we need to get below deck, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Now, what's going on? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. We don't have time to explain, Emily said, grabbing her arm. Just come on. We herded them below deck, the confined space suddenly feeling like a sanctuary despite the looming danger outside. The dim light and the hum of the boat systems were a stark contrast to the dark, open sea above. Okay, what now? Dave asked, his voice shaking. We're getting the flares, I said. We're going to signal for help. And then what? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Then we wait, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We just have to stay calm and wait for help. Jackson and Mark returned with the flares, their faces grim. Got them, Jackson said, holding up the bright red tubes. Let's hope someone sees them. We made our way back to the deck, the air feeling even heavier with the knowledge of what lurked beneath us. Jackson took one of the flares, his hand shaking slightly as he prepared to light it. Here goes nothing, he muttered, striking the flare and sending a bright red light shooting into the sky. The flare burned brightly, casting an eerie glow over the dark water. We watched it rise, our hopes pinned on the slim chance that someone, anyone, would see it and come to our rescue. Do you think anyone will see it? Chloe asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Jackson admitted, but we have to try. We stood there in silence, watching the flare burn out and fade into the night. The darkness seemed even more oppressive once the light was gone, and the reality of our situation settled over us like a heavy blanket. Okay, we need to stay calm, Jackson said, his voice firm. We need to keep our heads and think rationally. Rationally, Emily echoed, her voice rising. There's a giant prehistoric shark out there, and you want us to stay calm. Yes, Jackson said, his voice steady. Panicking isn't going to help us. We need to think clearly. He's right, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We need to stay focused. Let's get below deck and figure out our next move. We made our way back below deck, the confined space feeling even more claustrophobic now. The dim light and the hum of the boat's systems were a stark contrast to the dark, open sea above. Okay, what now? Dave asked, his voice shaking. We need to stay together, I said. We need to stay calm and think rationally. And then what? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We wait, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We just have to stay calm and wait for help. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. We huddled together, the fear and tension palpable in the small space. The boat swayed gently, the movement almost soothing despite the terror that gripped us. Do you think it's still out there? Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know, Jackson said, his voice tight, but we have to assume it is. Great, Emily muttered. Just great. We need to stay positive, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to believe that help is on the way. Yeah, right, Mark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, because that's going to make everything better. Enough, Jackson said, his voice firm. We need to stay focused. We need to keep our heads and think rationally. The minutes stretched into hours, the tension growing with each passing moment. We took turns watching the water, hoping for any sign of rescue, but the darkness remained unbroken. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very air around us. "It's back," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay calm," Jackson said, his voice steady. "We need to stay calm." But as the growl grew louder, the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into full-blown panic. "We're going to die," Sarah sobbed, her voice breaking. "Shut up," Mark snapped, his own fear evident in his voice. "Just shut up. Everyone quiet," Jackson shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to stay calm." But it was too late. The panic had taken hold, and there was no stopping it. The monster was back, and this time, there was no escaping it. The growl reverberated through the hull of the yacht, a deep, primal sound that sent shivers down my spine. The panic in the confined space was almost tangible, a living, breathing entity that threatened to overwhelm us all. Jackson tried to maintain order, but the fear was too great, too all-consuming. "We need to stay calm," Jackson shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising chaos. "Everyone, get to the center of the boat, away from the edges." "Calm? Are you kidding me?" Dave yelled, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "There's a freaking monster out there." "Just do it," Jackson commanded, his voice cracking with the strain. We scrambled to the center of the boat, huddling together like frightened children. The growl grew louder, vibrating through the floor and walls, making it feel like the very air was alive with menace. "What do we do?" Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "We can't just sit here and wait to die. We need to find a way to defend ourselves," Mark said, his voice shaking but resolute. "We can't just be sitting ducks." "But how?" Chloe asked, her eyes darting around the small space. "What can we possibly do against something like that?" "We have to try," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't just give up." "She's right," Jackson said, his voice firm. "We need to find something we can use as weapons. Anything that can give us a fighting chance." We began to search the small cabin, our movements frantic and desperate. We found a few items that could potentially be used as weapons. Kitchen knives, a fire extinguisher, a flare gun. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Okay, everyone listen up," Jackson said, trying to sound authoritative. "We need to stick together. If it comes to it, we fight. We don't give up. Fight!" Dave echoed, his voice trembling. "How do we fight something like that?" "With everything we've got," Jackson said, his eyes hard. "We don't have a choice." The growl outside grew louder, more insistent, and the boat rocked violently as if something massive had collided with it. We stumbled, clutching at each other for support, our makeshift weapons clutched tightly in our hands. "It's here," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The boat rocked again, harder this time, and we heard the sickening sound of metal scraping against metal. The monster was testing the boat, probing for weaknesses, and it was only a matter of time before it found one. "Everyone get ready," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Stay together and be prepared to fight." We formed a tight circle, our backs to each other, our eyes scanning the small space for any sign of the creature. The growling continued, a low, menacing sound that filled the air with dread. And then, with a sudden, violent lurch, the boat was lifted out of the water. We screamed, the sound of our terror blending with the monstrous growl as the boat tilted sharply to one side. We clung to whatever we could, the world spinning around us as the yacht was tossed like a toy. "Hold on," Jackson shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. The boat slammed back into the water with a bone-jarring crash, and we were thrown to the floor, our makeshift weapons scattering around us. The growling continued, louder now, more insistent, and we knew we didn't have much time. The first light of dawn was a welcome sight, casting a pale, golden glow over the horizon. We were exhausted, our bodies aching from the frantic paddling and the sheer terror of the night. The life raft drifted aimlessly, the water now calm and deceptively peaceful. The creature's growls had faded into the depths, leaving us in an eerie silence. For a moment, none of us spoke. We were too drained, both physically and emotionally, to do anything but stare at the rising sun. The events of the night felt surreal, like a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. Is it over?" Sarah's voice broke the silence, trembling with fear and exhaustion. "I don't know," Jackson replied, his voice hoarse. He was slumped against the side of the raft, the flare gun still clutched in his hand. "But we need to stay vigilant. We can't assume we're safe yet. How much longer can we keep this up?" Dave asked, his face pale and drawn. "We're exhausted. We can't keep paddling forever." "We don't have to," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We just need to stay afloat and hope someone finds us." "Hope?" Mark scoffed, his voice filled with bitterness. "Hope isn't going to save us. It's all we have right now," Emily said quietly. She was sitting next to me, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We have to believe that help is on the way." The minutes stretched into hours as we drifted in the open sea. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear that still gripped us. We took turns keeping watch, our eyes scanning the water for any sign of the creature, or, hopefully, rescue. "Does anyone have a signal on their phone?" Chloe asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "Maybe we can call for help." "I already checked," Jackson said, shaking his head. "No signal. We're too far out." "Great," Chloe muttered, her frustration evident. "Just great. We need to stay positive," I said, trying to keep the group focused. "We survived the night. We can survive this." "Easy for you to say," Mark grumbled. "You're not the one who had to cut the ropes while that thing was trying to eat us." "Enough," Jackson said firmly. "We need to stay calm and work together. Arguing isn't going to help." The hours dragged on, the sun now high in the sky. We were dehydrated, our throats parched and our bodies weak. The fear of the creature's return loomed over us, but the immediate concern of survival took precedence. "Does anyone have any water left?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I have a little," Emily said, passing her water bottle around. We each took a small sip, the precious liquid barely enough to quench our thirst. "We need to find land," Jackson said, his voice determined. "We can't just drift out here forever." "But how?" Dave asked, his voice filled with despair. "We have no idea where we are." "We'll figure it out," Jackson said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We have to." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the water, our hope began to wane. The fear of the creature's return gnawed at us, but the exhaustion and dehydration were taking their toll. "Look!" Chloe suddenly shouted, pointing to the horizon. "A boat! I see a boat!" We all turned, our hearts leaping with hope. In the distance, a small speck was moving toward us. It was a boat, and it was getting closer. "Wave the flare!" Jackson shouted, scrambling to his feet. "Let them know we're here." He fired the flare into the sky, the bright light cutting through the fading daylight. We waved our arms, shouting and hoping that the boat would see us. "Please let them see us," I whispered, my voice filled with desperation. The boat continued to move toward us, and as it got closer, we could see the people on board waving back. They had seen us. "They're coming," Emily shouted, her voice filled with relief. They saw us. We watched as the boat approached, our hearts pounding with hope and relief. The people on board were shouting, their voices filled with concern. "Are you okay?" One of them called out as they pulled up alongside our raft. "What happened?" "We were attacked," Jackson said, his voice shaking with emotion. "There's something in the water. Something big. Let's get you on board," the man said, reaching out to help us. "We'll get you to safety." One by one, we climbed onto the boat, our bodies weak and trembling. The relief of being rescued was overwhelming, and tears of gratitude filled our eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much. You're safe now," the man said, his voice gentle. "We'll get you to shore." As the boat sped toward land, we huddled together, the reality of our ordeal sinking in. We had survived the night, but the terror of what we had encountered would stay with us forever. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Jackson said, his eyes distant. "But we know what we saw. And we'll never forget it," Emily added, her voice filled with resolve. "No matter what." As the boat reached the shore, we were met by emergency responders, their faces filled with concern. They helped us off the boat, wrapping us in blankets and giving us water. "You're safe now," one of them said, his voice soothing. "You're going to be okay." But as we looked out at the vast ocean, we knew that the world was not as safe as we once believed. The creature we had encountered was still out there, lurking in the depths, a reminder of the ancient dangers that still existed. And as we walked away from the shore, we made a silent vow. We would never return to the sea.